Welcome to a new episode of the Animal Liberation Hour, where we bring you inspiring stories from revolutionaries who are changing the world for all animals. My name is Shriya, and I am thrilled to be your host for today. I sat down with Dr. Crystal Heath, a brilliant animal rights activist and vegan veterinarian. Dr. Heath is a rarity among the veterinary profession with her outspoken stance on animal rights and rightful criticism of the current system of veterinary education. She graduated from the University of California, Davis School of Veterinary Medicine and currently works as a well-respected shelter veterinarian in Berkeley, California. Beyond her professional life, Dr. Heath is dedicated to raising awareness about the mistreatment of animals in various animal exploitative industries, advocating for political action and policy change to reflect her animal rights cause, and dismantling the speciesist views that are predominant among the veterinary profession. Alongside her fellow compassionate veterinarians, she co-founded Our Honor, a nonprofit organization that seeks to support and empower people in animal-related professions to never lose sight of their compassion and to advocate against the mistreatment of animals. In this episode, we talked about her journey into animal rights, how activists and veterinarians can work together and ignite positive change, her vision for a just veterinary education system, and so much more. I'm not gonna lie, this conversation really had me considering enrolling in veterinary school. So if you or anyone you know who really cares for animals and aspires to become a vet, this episode is an absolute must. Before we get into this episode, I want to remind you that the Animal Liberation Hour is a project of Animal Activism Mentorship. AAM is a free multinational program that helps aspiring animal rights activists find their voice in the movement and take their activism to a whole nother level. From one-on-one mentorships to free workshops and trainings to this podcast, AAM seeks to empower humans to fight the good fight for all earthlings. For more information, visit animalactivismmentorship.com and follow AAM on social media, that's Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube at Animal Activism Mentorship. You can also keep up with the Animal Liberation Hour on AAM socials as well. Animal Activism Mentorship is so honored and proud to be fueled by farm animal rights movement. Without further ado, I bring you the fierce Dr. Crystal Heath. Thank you so much, Dr. Heath, for taking the time to chat with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. This is going to be fun.
Oh, yeah, I bet. Like, your story is remarkable. You have so many challenges that you've overcome that you're still continuing to, battle through. It's remarkable, and I'm sure that your experiences are going to inspire a lot of our followers, our mentees, mentors, and hopefully future veterinarians as well. So yeah, before we dive into your all of the activism and the journey that you've embarked on since then, I'm curious to know what young Crystal was like, how she connected with the whole animal rights ethic, and how that sort of solidified its way into all the work that you're doing right now.
Yeah, so I grew up, we had a lot of animals growing up. I grew up in a really rural area. My parents, we had dairy goats, and I was raised on goat milk. We always had chickens and a variety of critters running around: dogs, cats, horses, iguanas, snakes, turtles. We lived on a little 5-acre farm, and I grew up in a 4-H, which is kind of this organization that's now widely known among animal rights activists as an organization that kind of indoctrinates kids into animal slaughter. I raised dairy goats, but it got to the point where our first dairy goats we got were already milkers, and we never bred them after that, because if we wouldn't know what to do with the babies. If we had boy goats, then they would have to be sent to slaughter because there's just no homes for boy goats, unfortunately. And we don't want to add to the overpopulation of boy goats. Like, yeah, there are some sanctuaries that take on boy goats, like Happy Hens, wonderful sanctuary. But there's only so many spaces for them. So,
and this was back in the day as well.
Yeah, this is me growing up. Especially back in the day, there wasn't sanctuaries. Nobody wanted to, especially where we were. If a goat wasn't milking or going to be raised for meat, then there was just no place for them, unfortunately. And I always had a problem with this. And in 4-H, it's all your friends are in 4-H in my neighborhood. Like my next door neighbors raise pigs and cattle and chickens, and we all kind of grew up in this system. And it's weird because if you're an animal loving kid in a rural area, you start 4-H, but that also starts your indoctrination process of animals are here for our use and they serve a purpose and blah, blah, blah. Meanwhile, our dogs and cats are just happy to be members of the family, which is kind of interesting, even though they obviously are exactly the same. It's just kind of our belief about them. And so 4-H was a huge part of my life. I was vice president of my club, but when I had my baby goats and then it got to the point of where I had to decide to breed them or not, me and my sister, we were both like, no, we're not going to do that. And my parents were also very sympathetic to this idea. And so they were just companions after that. And, people made fun of us, and I was kind of then out of the 4-H group thing and kind of lost that social interaction where all the kids were, kind of bonding over raising their animals for the fair. And I was kind of out of that group now. We could still do like the crafts projects. I mean, there's a lot of great benefits to 4-H. They have great like photography. I showed my dogs, of course. The dog showing thing is also with the goal of eventually breeding them. I didn't breed my dog and I ended up spaying her. We actually did, we raised puppies, at some point we bred Australian Shepherd Border Collie mixes and golden retrievers. And now I am paying retributions for that because I'm a big proponent of spay neuter and do not breed your dogs. And, so it just goes to show even people who back in the day, or who now are raising animals for food and are breeding dogs, they can change. My parents are now can't believe that they bred dogs, and they're both vegan now.
Oh,
so,
okay.
And these are my parents who, when I was 10 years old, I started looking up PETA stuff and started reading all of their things. I think this might have been like before the internet, so you had to like mail away for stuff. And I don't even know how I got interested in it. Maybe like I saw something at the grocery store or whatever. And like they made really good points. And I'm like, oh yeah, this is definitely like the right side of things. This is the way our relationship with animals should go. And I was also like a very shy kid, and my relationship with animals were like the most important ones. And the ones where I felt so connected to another being, where I didn't, in my regular life have those close friendships as much as I did with my animals. So, that the PETA brochures really resonated with me. And so, yeah. And so one day when I was like 10 years old, I was like, I'm not eating animal products anymore. And my parents always made it really hard for me at that time. Like they were always enticing me with delicious food. And then I went to a birthday party and I told the mom at the birthday party who was serving hot dogs, no, I don't eat hot dogs. I don't eat animals. And so they made me peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. And my mom got so upset. She was like, you will eat whatever they give you. And so after that, I kind of thought like veganism, vegetarianism, it's an ideal, but just unrealistic, as somebody who relies on their parents to make them food for them. Sure. And actually, like when I first left the house, I started house sitting for these people who were involved with PETA and who rescued dogs. And at that point, I was like, I'm not bringing animal products into their house. And like, I'm going to, I opened their cabinets and I'm like, oh, this is what they eat. Like it started to make sense. Like I had no idea what to eat, and once they saw their food, I was like, oh, okay, well, I can do this. And then I stopped eating animal products. And at this point, I'm like, 18 or something, 18, 19. Um, but still like vegetarian, like still couldn't get my act together enough. And it wasn't really until recently that I really became more hardcore. And it all, started with kind of getting involved with activism here in Berkeley, moving to Berkeley. And then, there's so many vegan restaurants around. It's so easy. And getting involved with the fur ban in California, AB 44, which we passed. And that's kind of when all my friend circle, like they're all vegans. And it's like this pressure of eating animals kind of went away. And I had all these other people who were doing it. So it became so much easier to match my morals with my values. So
Totally. Isn't it the absolute best to have an animal rights vegan tribe who you could just be? And like when I also very recently started doing activism. I've been vegan. I was raised vegetarian, but vegan maybe 6, 7 years. But activism, I would say, was only within the last year or so that I started being like putting myself out there to speak up more and just meeting all of these people. And then when we do these tours and coming back to a house full of animal rights vegans, it was just something so beautiful about that. And I just so appreciate the community and the importance of having a positive support system, because the systems that we are up against, it's daunting, and having a crew of like-minded folks who are also part of the good fight is it's like I just can't describe it in a single word. I can feel how excited and happy it makes me.
And then you look at, these kids who are animal science majors like me in school. I was an animal science major because I loved animals, but all of your classmates and all of your friends are all eating animals, and we're all being taught how to raise animals for industry and for production. And for experimentation. That's the priority there. And you're all doing animal science because you want to go to vet school, and then it just becomes you're just getting indoctrinated more and more into animals are here for our use. And those who have an animal rights perspective are dangerous, are foolish. We have classes that are taught this. I actually chopped off the tail of a sheep in one of my animal science classes with no anesthesia. We banded their testicles. I watched as little baby piglets had their testicles chopped off with no anesthesia and their needle teeth removed. And, growing up in 4-H, I'm like, oh yeah, this is like, I've seen my neighbors debud their goats with no anesthesia. Like, this is just fine. And then you suddenly then contrast that with moving to Berkeley. And then my friend, who I've been friends with since I was 5 years old, was like, oh, hey, you have to come to Dingo Den. And I'm like, what is that? And she's like, just come hang out. And I like pushed her off. I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. So one night she's like, we're here. And I'm like, I had nothing to do. I'm going to stop by. And this is this activist house full of vegans. And I brought somebody who was not vegan at the time. And we had been discussing veganism. Like, I thought this person was kind of understood my perspective, even though they weren't vegan. And then, so you have this house of 20 people advocating for veganism, talking about, what they're going to do next. And then this person I'm with starts saying the most ridiculous things like, but there's no good baked goods, but like, what are you going to do with all the animals? Just like, let them all go. And like, it's unrealistic. It's not going to happen. And people were reacting to what they were saying with such horror. That was finally like the level of horror that was reasonable for the situation that we're facing, where I've always, had this feeling inside, through my animal science and veterinary career that like, oh my God, this is wrong. But yeah, this is the world that we live in. You got to do what you can do. It's unrealistic to envision a future where we don't use animals and don't eat animals. But seeing these people and learning about the history, I'm like, oh my gosh, yes, a future exists in a few years. We're not going to need to use animals, and the veterinary industry needs to get on board with this.
Yes.
Like, we need to be advocates for animals and help move this future in the right direction. We're the gatekeepers to policy and legislation. And right now we're not talking about these things. It's amazing the radio silence that exists in the veterinary profession about, even the Fauci beagle experiments that are going on right now. Is the veterinary profession talking about this? Absolutely not. Ventilation shut down last year. Of course, this is my big area. I've been trying to raise awareness about the horror of roasting pigs alive, hundreds of thousands of pigs because of supply chain disruptions. Was the veterinary industry talking about it at all? No. And when I brought it up, they're like, this is just activist animal rights propaganda, until the video and audio recordings came out. And then they were like, oh my God, this is real. And then once they started speaking about it and drafting letters and petitions, I partnered with other veterinarians like Dr. Ernie Ward, who created Veterinarians Against Ventilation Shutdown, and suddenly raising awareness about this. But there's like the beagle thing, we really need to start raising awareness about that. We need to jump on these things because it's just silence in the veterinary profession. Nobody is doing it. And we need activist help to get this done too.
Totally. And so as a kid, I think, and this is something that a lot of kids do, have that phase of like, I want to grow up and be a vet because I love animals. And that was me as well. I went to undergrad as a pre-vet, but I think pretty early on, I didn't connect so much about how maybe, I guess, anti-animal rights vet school would be. But I just felt that mentally, it wasn't for me. Just, I think the mental and emotional toll that I knew that I could handle. And so I wanted to look into other ways that I could help animals, which is how I got into science and being able to get animals out of vivisection. And so that's what I do, great. Which I really love, that I could still be in science, but also, help the animals. But so how were you inspired to become a veterinarian? Was that because of your love for animals? And you said that you had already become a vegetarian at 18, 19, and then after that going to vet school where, you're like, oh, I thought I was supposed to help animals, but this seems to contradict that in specific cases when it comes to animals who are bred for food or for clothing or for entertainment as opposed to companion animals. So how did you navigate that dissonance, and how did you stick to your ethic while also being, I guess, forced to participate in certain activities that were clearly unpleasant?
Let me first talk about the reasons you didn't go to vet school is so tragic, and there are thousands and thousands of people like you, and we are missing out on that compassionate perspective, unfortunately, because you didn't feel like you were welcome in it. You didn't feel like you had the heart to euthanize an animal or whatever it is that, or see animals in pain and suffering. And unfortunately, those people are the people we need in the profession, people who can't stand to see animals suffering, people who couldn't imagine euthanizing an animal.
They got to take out some more student loans and reapply. Well, I didn't apply in the first place, but maybe.
I mean, there is such a need. It's hard for sure, but there's so many things you can do as a vet. If you're not into surgery, you don't have to do surgery when you're out. I mean, you do have to do a couple surgeries in vet school, but if you don't want to ever euthanize an animal, you can be a veterinarian and never euthanize an animal. I personally don't like to see emergency cases, or historically, when I first graduated, I'm not seeing hit by car cases. I hate that. But now I've ended up working in a shelter where we do see a lot of emergencies, and I've kind of grown thicker skin, and I kind of reframe it. And I'm I am here to help this animal and relieve their suffering. And I'm the best person for this job. And so I'm going to do it. But I can only take a couple of times a month of that particular shelter. So it's hard. And you definitely, there's just this problem in the field too of, it used to be a predominantly male profession, and white male especially. And these are the people who are now heads of industry, heads of these animal ag corporations, and running things. And they have set up this system of hierarchy to perpetuate the power of those who are in power. And now we're mostly women in vet school, thankfully, but we're still living in a patriarchal structure. And so all of the women are very perfectionistic, trying to adhere to this feminine ideal that's been created by the patriarchy of being quiet and small and, kind of easy to get along with, go along with everything, put your head down. And now we have to inspire them to speak up. And I think it starts with knowing that there are others like you who also think that the system needs to be changed and we can envision a future that is much better. And the veterinary profession has a history of changing. We used to do horrible things in vet school. We used to exsanguinate animals where you bleed them out so that students could watch what it looks like when an animal dies of exsanguination. They used to inject animals with a toxic substance that would cause anaphylaxis. So they could watch the dog go through all the stages of anaphylaxis for their education. I mean, it's horrible. But now they don't do that anymore because compassionate voices have spoken up. And one thing that's going on right now is terminal surgeries, where students have to kill an animal for a healthy animal so that they could practice surgery on them. This is thought to be an improvement, since previously they had these colonies of animals that they kept in veterinary schools. They would anesthetize them, the students would open them up, do a variety of different surgeries on them, take out a piece of intestine or kidney, sew them back up again, let them heal. And then a couple of weeks later, another group of students would open them up, do another surgery on them, close them up. So they thought the more ethical thing to do is to actually euthanize. It's not euthanize, it's kill these animals after surgery. Euthanasia should be reserved for an animal who is suffering, and you're relieving their suffering by easing their death. But this is killing of a healthy animal. And this goes against our values as veterinarians. And many veterinarians have spoken up. This is one of the foundational issues with my group, Our Honor, is we talk about terminal surgeries along with the ventilation shutdown and other issues in the veterinary profession that prevent more compassionate systems from coming forward. But we have so many stories of veterinarians who have spoken up and who have changed their schools so that terminal surgeries are no longer done. One recent school that no longer does terminal surgeries is Colorado State. Now, when they announced this publicly, they faced a ton of backlash from the animal ag industry. Like the Fence Post, I don't know if you know this publication, wrote a thing on this: students aren't going to get the education they need, blah, 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 blah. Like they're not being trained properly in surgery because they can't kill their patients afterwards. And the schools that have stopped this procedure are now switching to an access to care model, where there are tons of animals out there who need surgery, who need spays and neuters. This is how I learned at UC Davis. And we didn't do terminal surgeries in our core surgery program. I think they are still doing it in an elective surgery program on those livestock species, sheep, et cetera. I think they still do that, but we can advocate for them to move away from that as well. So this access to care model is where students get a needy animal who actually needs surgery. They perform the surgery under the guidance of an experienced surgeon. Like this is kind of in line with how we practice human medicine. We make sure that the patient gets all of the care that they need, and students get the most important part of surgery is seeing how the animal wakes up, how the patient wakes up from surgery, if they're pain-free, educating the caretaker on how to take care of them, and then managing any complications that might arise afterwards. They completely miss out on this if they're just killing their patient afterwards. And it causes a great deal of emotional trauma to the students as well. So this is a big issue that our honor is dealing with, to end this indoctrination of veterinary students in normalizing a completely unethical system. Veterinary students should feel unafraid to speak out against this and advocate for a more compassionate policy. And many schools instead, when a student is like, I'm going to be a conscientious objector, they give the students a cadaver to practice on. This is not the same at all. And not the equal model would be an access to care model. Mm-hmm. It's not the same to practice surgery on a dead animal. Like this is what we do in dissection lab, but to feel a moving, bleeding patient who is experiencing pain and might be painful after surgery is a completely different thing. So that's one of the issues. I'm sorry, I kind of rambled there. I hope I answered your question.
No, not at all. I mean, yes, you did answer the question as not at all. You didn't ramble. They were all very important things to address. And I think that just beautifully led into like my next question of just vet schools where, you know, there are compassionate students who actually care about animals. Like, I love animals, so I'm going to go to vet school. And then they are confronted with these larger systems and powers that be and feel that they cannot speak up, and they just, you know, are forced to suck it up and get through it. And then they sort of perpetuate that system that already exists. So do you feel like vet schools are, you know, purposefully numbing this inherent compassion in students? And how do you foresee, and of course I would love you to go a little more into the work that Our Honor does and how it fits into the solution of creating a program of healing all animals, treating them all, viewing them all equally, and not one as, oh, companion animals, we're going to give this kind of care, versus animals bred for food, like we're going to give a certain kind of care. So how does Our Honor fit into, I guess, undoing the numbing that vet school can do, and I guess de-veganizing some people?
Yeah. Is it like, I wonder if it's a conscious choice that vet schools make to like, okay, we have to figure out how are we going to kind of desensitize these students to animal suffering, like, or is it just kind of a cultural thing that they've kind of developed, and there's these certain mindsets, and it comes from, you know, back in the day of where veterinary schools kind of came out of, and this is the USDA land grant program, and then, you know, this system of animal agriculture and the systems in place where, you know, they have these certain just kind of mentality, this sort of Western country mentality. You got to be tough. You got to, you know, you can't be a wimp. It's kind of just I think it's more of a cultural thing than a conscious thing. And we have to confront those sort of cultural norms. And it kind of stems to like a lot of things, just the history of just kind of white supremacy in the veterinary profession and how that has led to a lot of things. Like we also have a lot of homophobia in the veterinary profession that we're now raising awareness about, a lot of lack of diversity and inclusion. And it's all kind of related to, we're used to, you know, white people are used to being able to exploit those who are below us to maintain our power. And we have to change that perspective to just because somebody is below you in the power structure doesn't mean you have the right to exploit them. And that expands to all things. And that should be kind of a norm of the veterinary profession. So the first part is, in any social movement, is people speaking up and confronting those systems and confronting those who are spouting these things and saying, hey, this isn't based on science. This is based on culture. and history. And there's a lot of ways the veterinary profession has changed and improved. I mean, we used to kill 13 million dogs and cats in our shelters, and now that's down to less than a million. The shelter industry benefited from activism, raising awareness about animals and animal suffering. And we need to expand that to the animal agriculture industry, the animal experimentation industry. But that all starts with people feeling safe to speak up too. And you feel safe when you know others have your back. And so that's where our honor comes in. We have your back. We are a network of compassionate voices in the veterinary profession. If you are in vet school and you have a lecture that you feel is really problematic, or you're being asked to do something that goes against your values, come to us, speak up, and we will have your back. If you don't feel, I mean, and everybody has a different risk level that they're willing to take, and we totally appreciate that. If you want to remain anonymous, that's fine. Let us handle everything. We'll write letters, we'll address this, we'll get media attention around these issues. The public wants to know, especially terminal surgeries. If the public knew that veterinary students had to kill their patients for their education, and if that story goes wide, like that could be a game changer. So just getting these stories out there and telling these personal stories. I think personal stories have power, just like the Me Too movement. Once somebody shares their own personal story, is vulnerable, say like, these are my fears, this is what's going on, this is how it made me feel, this is how I was forced to go against my values, this is the backlash that I faced. Other people are willing to share their story too. And that's kind of the foundation of our honor, and how we support people to tell their story so that we can change systems.
Yeah, no, that's a very important resource because this is something that I hear very often, that like even outside of vet schools, like or like even in high schools where people have to do dissections, which is so much work being done to do away with that, or even in medical schools where pigs are being used for all these surgical practices that are slowly being overturned. So yeah, it's important to have groups like Our Honor and this network of veterinarians who still remain committed and connected to that, their morals, and despite all of the fog that the status quo tends to send our way. So how was that for you, sticking to that, your intuition, knowing that your morals were right, you're staying rooted to that through vet school and as an animal rights veterinarian? I don't imagine that's a walk in the park.
I wish I could say that I stuck to my morals throughout, but obviously like in my pre-vet school days in animal science, I chopped off a sheep's tail. I was not perfect. I did not stick to my values. I did not speak up when something was being said that I thought was problematic. I did not support my classmates as well as I should. And, that looking back, I can now advise people like, hey, I made mistakes. You'll make mistakes too. It's impossible living in a speciesist world to always stick to your values, because sometimes you just don't know what to say and you don't know what the right direction is to go in. And you're like, well, if I just put my head down and power through, I can become a veterinarian, then I can help animals. And, that's fine. But students have so much power to change systems. And historically, like the Berkeley free speech movement's a great example of that. And the schools are scared to death of students because students are the ones who pay the tuition.
Exactly.
And, they don't, and it's so sad how students don't realize how much power they have. And they always think like, oh my gosh, I'm at the mercy of my teachers, my grade, blah, blah, blah. Like, no, they're scared of you. Like you need to speak up and make some noise and change systems, because you can. And I think just empowering people to do that.
Yeah. And what's an effective way for students to come forward? And like, is there a specific strategy that you feel would be most impactful when making their voices heard at vet schools? Like, do they just stop paying their tuition? Do they do walkouts or do demonstrations? Like, what do you, does Our Honor have any sort of guidance on specific protest or activism strategies as well?
Each case is different, for sure. And it starts like the easy, simple thing is you're in that class that is every vet school has it the first semester. This is the animal welfare versus animal rights class, where they're taught that animal rights activists are a danger to our profession. The animal law education system, like at Yale, Harvard is doing a great job too. Those are a danger to our profession. That's what they're being taught. And they're being taught that animal activists lie to raise money for their organizations. And just raising your hand and speaking up and asking the questions in class, that's a brave move. And you have to formulate your questions the right way, depending on what is being taught. And maybe even bring up specific stories that different activist groups have brought forward and how, hey, this specific footage I saw, there's no way to doctor it unless they're like, and they'll claim the most outrageous things, like how videos and photos were doctored, almost like we're like moon landing style, like fakes. It's insane what some of the allegations have been made. And I think we really just asking that question is huge, but a lot of people aren't even brave enough to do that. So I think giving those presentations to us, like giving the materials to Our Honor, so we can draft an appropriate letter to the professor and to the dean and refute a lot of the claims that are being made. Sticking to the science, I think, is a great way to do it. If one day veterinary students do have the power to, have the guts to walk out, that would be awesome. Where we are right now, not so much going to happen with the way vet school is right now, but in the future, I'm envisioning it.
It's a very powerful visual I'm seeing. It's pretty cool.
So, I mean, if enough students complain about some of these things, they will change. And it doesn't have to be a majority by any means. All it takes is sometimes even just one student can change systems. If you have like 3 or 6, like that is huge. You can absolutely change things, especially threats to the media. Like so much of it is kept in power because of silence, because people are scared to go to the media about this, and schools are scared to death students will go to the media about these things. And they threaten students, if you tell other people about your curriculum or publish the curriculum or take pictures, you'll be threatened with expulsion. And I recently had a blog post about Stephanie Fraisel, who was a student who refused to do terminal surgery at Auburn University and was faced with threats of expulsion. And she was able to graduate and just find like really affected her emotionally, and her classmates were teasing her, making fun of her, and that's just not right. And that's a story that
she wasn't able to graduate.
No, she was. Yeah, she graduated. Thankfully, she got an F in the class. Like, just outrageous that they would do this. But we need those stories of students right now who are facing those things so that we can act and we can protect them, because nobody should have to go through that.
Totally. Yeah. And I think like the point that you made of asking questions is so powerful, because like, for example, if an instructor were to say, oh, you're not allowed to take a photo of this and post it or you'll face expulsion, just something as simple as, really, why? I've never got this kind of instruction in my physics class. Like, why is that the case here? And then it's like, at some point, they're going to have to say that because the public doesn't approve of what's actually happening.
Exactly. And it's so frustrating. Like, I know what they're going to say back. And it's so frustrating, that mentality, for sure.
Yeah, and what kept you going? Because you have and continue to face a lot of pushback from the veterinary industry because you are challenging the status quo. You're going against the grain of the culture, and you're going with what is what is the right way to treat another being. So what, and yes, we did talk about the importance of having community, and you have this great support system at Our Honor, of other compassionate vegan veterinarians who resonate with the mission. But through vet school and outside of that, like when you're working at the shelter and when you're working in a not exclusively animal rights environment, what is the difference between the two, and what keeps you going when you're in these challenging situations?
Yeah, I mean, I have to realize, and I just realized that I come from a position of privilege. Like I was on my own in vet school. I got a massive amount of student loan debt. My parents didn't pay for my education. I paid off my student loan debt, luckily. I worked really hard, and I didn't focus on activism as soon as I graduated. I just worked 7 days a week so I can pay off my student loans and then have a nice safety net to live off of. And then, established myself in my career. So I am a well-respected, not as an animal rights activist, but just as a veterinarian here in the Bay Area. And, I know I'll always be employed because I'm good at what I do, and my services are in demand, and I'm well respected by a lot of I work for a variety of different places and a variety of different shelters. So I know I'll always be employed. And so from that position of privilege, I think it just also comes from just reading history. Some of my favorite books about this are Bury the Chains, King Leopold's Ghost, Rebel Cinderella, by Adam Hochschild, which I strongly recommend. It's kind of all about ending slavery in the British Empire. It's King Leopold's Ghost, also ending slavery in the Congo. And these books are very powerful because you see the similarities and you see how much backlash people faced to do the right thing. Mm-hmm. And, you just have to stick to your values. And it's easier when you come from a place of privilege too. And you're on the right side. And then the more you speak out and the more the industry pushes back against you, the more friends you make. Honestly, it's so I'm bring it on. I'm going to put stuff out there, because the worst, the more that they throw back at me, it's it just increases my power. And it's amazing how that works. Just the more that they can, the meaner that they can be, it just, I'm going to put that out there. Oh my God, they said the most horrible thing, or they made this meme about me.
Kind of fuel, and then, yeah.
It's just fuel to the fire, definitely. And then I'm on Glenn Greenwald's show, and Glenn Greenwald writes about me. And yeah, just bring it on. Give me your worst. The worst that they can do is ignore you, because then you can't really do anything.
You can't, fight back.
But if they do try to fight back, and then it just points out the hypocrisy.
Not have done that.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, that's so cool and so empowering just to hear that. And I can see that radiate because we're on a video call right now, and I can see that excitement. So one of the things and I do remember we were on a Clubhouse room together once. I don't know if you recall, but there was a conversation about, I think the title of the room was veterinarians are doctors who eat their patients, or something like that, and that was something that I'd always thought of as a kid. I was like, that's so weird that, that's I just found that very kind of just it made me feel very uncomfortable to see it that way. But it was always a thought that I had. And then the conversation sort of drifted into the issues or the struggles of sanctuaries, so farmed animal sanctuaries, and being able to get veterinarians come and see their animals, or get farriers to come and take care of their animals. So again, that has to do with the huge control that large animal agriculture and more of the animal exploitative industries have over these professions. So what are your thoughts on that? And do you feel like there are specific areas within animal rights that would require more compassionate veterinarians who could fill that void?
Oh yeah, definitely. There's so much room in sanctuary medicine. And yeah, about the whole veterinarians are doctors who eat their patients thing. I tweeted recently, I'm a veterinarian and an animal rights activist. It's kind of like being a pediatrician and a child's rights activist, except people hate you more. And that resonated with a lot of people. I got like a bunch of likes and retweets. And people were like, oh my God, I totally feel this, and so yeah, that was just hilarious. But back to like the sanctuaries. So the sanctuary thing is tough. Like obviously sanctuaries need so-called food animal veterinarians who are used to working in industry, and their goal is always to make the most profit for the producer, not necessarily to help the animals. Like, of course, we want to let's help. They kind of do incremental changes, like how can we improve the welfare of these animals that are in the system? But these welfarist changes ultimately do lead to worse suffering for the animals. A good example is, of course, the whole cage-free thing. It's like, okay, now they're cage-free, but now they're pecking at each other. So now we're going to amputate their beaks so they don't peck at each other. There's no good way to do this. Or, pigs are stepping on their babies. So now we're going to put them in farrowing crates and gestation crates. And so yeah, the answer isn't always in the best interest of the animal.
Yeah.
And can lead improvements in welfare, and actually can lead to worsening welfare.
Mm-hmm.
But also sanctuaries, there's so many rules around veterinary care and in these so-called food animals. One great example is the chickens often benefit from deslorelin implants to prevent them from laying eggs. So a lot of sanctuaries will implant their chickens with this ferret implant. It is completely against the rules for veterinarians to do this because they can't be used in so-called food animals, even though the animals will never end up in the food chain. Veterinarians could lose their license if the board finds out that they did this. So you're asking the people with the knowledge about how to treat chickens, we're in this system of, using chickens for profit for a producer, and in that mentality, and now they're going to face legal ramifications and potentially lose their license for doing what is in the best interest of the chicken, is to implant them with this thing. And another example is antibiotics in food animals too. There are a lot of antibiotics that we can't use, and a lot of animals would benefit from, who are suffering because they can't get the antibiotics that they need. And this is because the food animal industry abused these certain antibiotics historically. They used to put these antibiotics in the water, led to a lot of bacterial resistance. And it's not healthy for people to consume the meat of animals who have been given certain antibiotics, certain drugs. But these animals will never enter the food chain, but we have set these rules, and these rules need changing. But the only way that they're going to change is if veterinarians and activists organize too. We could really use activist help in this area to help these animals. This is a great opportunity for us to kind of fight back against these institutions that are perpetuating this speciesist mentality for the benefit of our patients. We have to set the right priorities, our patients, not industry. And we have to say like, hey, animals who aren't ever going to enter the food chain have a right to these life-saving medications. And veterinarians who break the rules to save their patient's life should not face any sort of retaliation for doing that.
Yeah, it's so bizarre when veterinarians are, they're taking is it called, what kind of oath is it called?
Oh, yeah. Well, it's not exactly the Hippocratic oath, but let me just read it to you real fast if I
Yeah.
have.
Yeah, I know it's the vet school version of.
Yeah, because it is actually very speciesist.
Yes, I think that was also part of the conversation that was had in that group, and it took, like, when I first heard of the Hippocratic oath, the Hippocrates didn't click in. I thought of oh, you're a hypocrite and you're taking this oath. And I was like, why would they call it that? And then I was like, oh, wait, never mind.
Yeah, it's okay. So it's really interesting because each country has its own veterinary oath. And part of our honors thing was we were going to make our own oath and eventually have students kind of during their white coat ceremony, those who did not want to cite the speciesist AVMA oath would, kneel or do some sort of act of disobedience and then choose to recite their own oath or our oath. But the oath is, being admitted to the profession of veterinary medicine, I solemnly swear to use my scientific knowledge and skills for the benefit of society through the protection of animal health and welfare, the prevention and relief of animal suffering, the conservation of animal resources, which is kind of the promotion of public health, and the advancement of medical knowledge. I will practice my profession conscientiously, with dignity, and in keeping with the principles of veterinary medical ethics. I accept as a lifelong obligation the continual improvement of my professional knowledge and competence. So there is some good things here, but kind of the benefit of society. Let's hope that benefit of society also means the non-humans in our society. Conservation of animal resources. This is problematic. Let's
calling them resources.
Let's get rid of that. But Hungary has probably one of the best oaths, and I'll just read that. It says, I will use the knowledge acquired during my studies to prevent and cure diseases and to benefit the well-being of my patients. I will avoid causing unnecessary pain to animals and will be conscious of protecting the biodiversity of our natural environment. Now
I like that one.
Yeah, that's a great one. And that definitely kind of speaks to maybe we should start to scale down animal agriculture, which is kind of the leading cause of biodiversity loss in our planet. Our suggested oath is, as a member of the veterinary medical profession, I solemnly swear that I will use my scientific knowledge and skills for the benefit of all beings and the environment. I will strive to advance medical knowledge and promote animal health and well-being, relieve animal suffering, and protect the health of the planet and everyone in it. I will strive continuously to improve my professional knowledge and competence and to maintain the highest professional and ethical standards for myself and the profession. I will strive to strengthen the other's understanding of the inherent needs and interests of all animals.
Yeah, that didn't sound speciesist at all. So I like that one too.
Yeah, so I think we all need to strive for the inherent needs and interests of all animals.
Of all living beings on this earth. Absolutely. So I want to be respectful of your time. So I just want to, I have a few closing questions to wrap up this just such an inspiring, enlightening discussion. I'm just so grateful that I was able to have with you. So we are the Animal Activism Mentorship Program, and we like to sort of center that theme of mentorship, and you're doing so much of that with our honor and setting an example of the kind of mentor you want to be for future veterinarians. But along your journey, what kind of mentors did you have who inspired you to to follow your intuition, go with what you knew was right? Or what kind of mentors did you wish you had had while on your path?
One of the key mentors in choosing my profession was the veterinarian at the Sacramento SBCA, who kind of let a third-year veterinary student come in and do surgeries, and had faith in me and kind of showed me how awesome. I mean, I never volunteered in an animal shelter before, and she's going to open my eyes to how great shelter medicine was and how much fun it is too. And she taught me so much about surgery and how to save as many animals as possible, and let me do a leg amputation as a third-year vet student, and just kind of gave me the courage that I could do this. And some of the great mentors in the animal rights community, of course, like my big influence is my friend since I was 5 years old, Julie Waldrop, who brought me to Dingo Den and introduced me to the activist community here in Berkeley, California. And I've learned so much from all of the activists here. But I definitely wish that I had that animal rights veterinarian growing up. And that's who I hope to be for somebody. I never had that sort of vegan veterinarian I could go to when I was a student who kind of showed me that there is a future that is possible, and this is how you fight back against people who are saying these things, that this is the way you refute some of those industry talking points. And that's kind of what I hope to do, is refute what the institutions, what the AVMA is saying, because they are not following the science and they are not very progressive in their stances on these things. So we need to fight back.
Exactly. And they're not, they're not for the animals, they're for the industries that profit off of them. So it's going to take us activists and the veterinarians who embark on this profession with the goal of, for them at least, I'd like to think for the most part, with the goal of helping animals, to stick true to that. And if not a veterinarian, what other profession do you think you would have considered to, still be able to interact with animals and make their lives better?
I probably would have ended up, I don't know if I probably would do this now at my age, or if I had interacted with the animal rights community earlier when I was in college. But what I would do is I would do animal science, get a master's in animal science, get really into the industry, do what it took, get on the inside, document everything that they're saying and teaching. And then go, I love policy and legislation, having worked on AB 44. And then in Berkeley, I worked along with Compassionate Bay and Direct Action Everywhere to encourage Berkeley to set a goal of 100% divestment from animal products.
That was huge. That made huge news. That was amazing. Yeah.
And I find government legislation fascinating and frustrating too. Yeah. But I would love to be that person that's giving policy memos to legislators and refuting what the industry is telling them. Because right now, I know there are people working for the ag industry telling these legislators their science on greenhouse gas emissions that are totally false.
They're beef checkoff funded science.
Oh my gosh, yeah. And now there's dairies in California that are making more money off of these dairy digesters, methane capturing, than they are from milk. So now we're turning cows into batteries, and that's the future, because they can't profit from milk anymore. So how are they going to profit? They're going to profit on these carbon offset things that they are selling. And we need to combat those things that are being told to our legislators. And so I love just kind of sitting by myself and drafting these really long, in-depth things. I don't know if you've seen the other things I've written, you can check out on our honor, well-cited sources on what the future looks like and what current practices that are in place that are really detrimental.
I've got my Friday night planned out now. I'm just going to sit by myself and read a bunch of things.
And it's not, right now, I am a really crappy writer because I just studied science and math all through college. And I'm like, oh my God, I wish I would have done more writing when I was in college.
I feel that too. I definitely feel that too. I was very into the sciencey side of things, but now that like I've been listening to a lot more podcasts and like reading a bunch of what other people write and activists write, and you know, Sentient Media has a great they have great articles, and that's like, oh wow, maybe like should I go back to school for all of these different things? I feel like I have a whole newfound appreciation for school and things that I took for granted at the time, and now I'm like, oh, I wish I'd paid more attention in my writing class.
Oh, yeah, I know. I'm like so grateful for the activist community because I force upon them my writing and I'm like, please give me feedback on this. And then they like tear it apart. And I'm like, and my sister, thank God, my sister, she's a writer and she's written this novel actually that came out. I should totally plug it. It's called The Reckless Kind. It's animal rights. It's a very animal rightsy themed book. I'm butchering the oh, that's so species. I can't believe I said butcher.
I know, no, it's okay. I think we're all trying to catch ourselves. Like it's sometimes even if you use a term with an animal in it, it's like, wait, is chicken species? Like I don't know.
I apologize in advance for everything I said on this podcast. Like I am sorry for saying food animal, livestock. I realize
you use
all these
quotes,
things are
like you use the quotes. So we get what you mean.
Here's my apology from the outset. I have been indoctrinated and I'm still breaking habits. And
well, we all
I'm going to do a lecture on this whole thing, how our species is language in the future. But yeah, what was I saying? Oh, anyway, thankfully, like the activist community who like gives me feedback on my writing, and some veterinarians and my sister who's been great.
And yeah, your sister's novel you'd mentioned, which is also, I think, a very powerful form of activism, is having novels that have an animal rights theme in the center, just to bring it into everyday conversation. And it's not something that's like, hush, hush, I can't tell people that I'm an animal rights activist. But if it's just part of our day-to-day media or like books and films, and just have that be a norm and let us talk about it more.
Yeah.
So we'll be sure to mention the book in the show notes as well.
Reckless Kind, Carly Heath is the author, and it's a 1900s Scandinavian, like queer found family vibe. It's very animal rights themes. It's got animals. It's got everything in it. So
intrigued. I'm gonna see if I can get this delivered to my library so I can give it a read.
Yeah, it's great. It's been on a lot of top. It's a young adult novel too. It's been on a lot of top lists lately. So
congrats!
Hopefully that will get big.
Yeah. And like, I'll let this be the last questions. I feel like I could talk to you forever. It's just I've just enjoyed this so much. This might, I mean, I guess you've kind of touched on this with your revamped oath, which I loved. How would you redesign the current veterinary education to reflect that oath of doing good by all living beings? What would that system of education look like?
Oh gosh, from the outset, I think we should talk about history of how we have always expanded our circle of compassion. We can look at the medical profession and, talk about these stories of the AIDS activists in the 90s and how they collaborated with human doctors to advance their care.
They didn't ask nicely from the get, like asking nicely didn't work. So
there are different teams, like for sure. There's like the ones on the inside who are like talking directly. Then there was, it's this ecosystem of the movement that's so important. You have the more radical, the ACT UPs, which I love. Like,
oh yeah,
obviously, like a lot of great work with ACT UP and hugely influential with Direct Action Everywhere's way that they do things too. And So I think history is really important. Like just one class on the history of how activism has helped advance um, things forward and how activism has expanded our circle of compassion, and looking at the holes in the veterinary profession, like why are we so lacking in diversity and inclusion? What are some areas of improvement? Envisioning the future of what our relationship with animals looks like. And studying how, really pointing out consciousness and where does consciousness come from? What are the correlates of consciousness and mammal brains, many avian brains? There's evidence that they're conscious, of course. I mean, anyone who's interacted with these species knows. And cephalopods are conscious, octopuses, like amazing things that they can do, and the way that they interact with the world. And even though they're vastly different from us, and we have to have consideration of those conscious beings that exist. And, teaching students, they're not kids at this point, I guess, how we've historically oppressed others, how change has happened, consciousness, from a science-based perspective, and then what is our duty in dealing with these conscious beings, and then teaching nonviolent communication. There's so much violence in our communication and our training in veterinary school. I love Brene Brown's work on vulnerability and shame. And shame is just pervasive in our profession, this perfectionistic mindset. And that's what leads to the high suicide rate in the veterinary profession, sadly. So really confronting shame, being vulnerable, nonviolent communication, studying consciousness, and then what is our duty, studying history of social movements. All these things are so important in how we approach medicine.
That was so, so wonderfully said. And I admire how you bring everything together. It's not a single issue approach. You're bringing in all of these, the human elements, the systems of oppression, the history of different kinds of oppression, and how they all interconnect, and how we can change the world for all, because that's such a powerful remark. And also with the advancements that's being made within the veterinary education space, with replacing live animals with those really realistic mannequins to practice dissection, or having an opportunity to practice alongside an experienced surgeon on an animal who needs that specific procedure, or having veterinary students take trips to sanctuaries where animals who've been rescued are, and interact with them and maybe treat them. And so just have them very integrated into what animal welfare, in quotes, actually looks like. Welfare is not just, we're going to give you an extra inch of space. It's like you're living a life worth its own, and with dignity, respect, and in freedom. And it's and how I think it is the moral imperative and obligation of the veterinary profession to parallel that and advocate for that. And I can't thank you enough for the work that you're doing, and all the students who are going to find safety and solidarity and community with the work that you do. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me on. And yeah, I just imagine if people hear the animal rights perspective from their veterinarian, a trusted source where they're bringing their loved ones to for care, and they walk into the office and there's just all of this animal rights sort of feel to it. There's brochures on animal suffering. There's, maybe a documentary playing on the television screen about animal suffering or a food system. Something not too horrifying.
Yeah. Or the beagles who are rescued from a lab are now running out in grass. So, we can have it a little happy too.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that's the future of the veterinary profession, to be working to advocate for compassion for all species.
Exactly. Rather than be skeptical that you feed your dog plant-based food, which I think is thing where that happens way too often. It's like, oh, dogs are carnivores. And I'm like, I thought you were a vet. They're not carnivores.
Meanwhile, you have Royal Canin, who is one of the most respected food companies, sells a vegetarian diet. So
and like, on their websites too, they mention that a well-balanced plant-based diet is suitable for dogs. Like, and all of these leading commercial dog foods mention that, and they also sell plant-based dog food. So
yeah, I mean, we need to be scientists here. We're veterinarians, we're scientists, and we need to realize that dogs and cats need nutrients, not ingredients. And now all of the nutrients they can get can come from plant-based sources. And now we need to work. And 25% of the animals killed in this country go to feed our dogs and cats.
And they're not human grade. They're not the human grade ingredients either.
Yeah, I mean, not always. And so there's so many detrimental effects. I mean, obviously, but there aren't enough vegan dog and cat food companies out there because of this just marketing that, feed dogs and cats like their ancestors, like your ancestor. Oh, please. They're like, our goal is to have them like lay on our couch and live a long life. Their ancestors died off young so that they could make room for the younger, more powerful generation.
The health of the pack. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, we do not want to feed our animals like their ancestors. Your little pug isn't a wolf. Like, yeah. Seriously.
Yeah. Okay. I can sense going into another hour-long conversation about that. But yeah, like you said, that we are having a lot of up and coming innovation in the companion animal food space, which is really exciting. And just so many things to look forward to, so many things to advocate for, and a lot of change that needs to be made. But we're, like you said, the more pushback we get, we're going to get stronger and push back even harder until we get
let it fuel the fire.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. It's the good kind of fire. Awesome. Is there anything else that you wanted to add before we sign off?
We've talked about veterinarians in our honor, but really we need activist help. We need activists to come help us. Our honor's goal is to bridge the divide between activists and veterinarians. And veterinarians can't do this alone. We're busy saving one animal at a time. Mm-hmm. We need activists to help do social media, our website, help us write things, because we're not very good writers. We need help. So please, if you are inspired by this, please reach out, ouronor.org, and help us. And yeah.
I have a feeling you're going to get some good responses from that, because we always love to find ways that activists can infiltrate spaces to make the world better for all animals. So we'll be sure to link all of that in the show notes. Thank you so much for all the work that you do. And we'll be in touch with all of the things, and can't wait to see all of the work that Our Honor continues to do.
Thank you so much. Thanks so much for giving me your time.
Thank you all so much for listening to this fascinating conversation with Dr. Heath. If you're looking to get involved in her trailblazing work, be sure to follow her nonprofit, Our Honor, which we will link in the show notes below. Compassion and respect for all animals should be the norm, regardless of one's profession, and Dr. Heath's work is so crucial in ensuring that we all have that awakening. If you enjoyed this episode and our podcast, please rate and review the Animal Liberation Hour, as it helps others find us more easily, and the more people who find out about us, the more they can be inspired by our guests and turn that inspiration into actionable change for the animals. And don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube at Animal Activism Mentorship, where you can keep up with the podcast and all things AAM, including our upcoming week of animal rights action in Atlanta, Georgia, from February 19th till 26th. So if you want more information on that, be sure to check out our events page on Facebook. You can also hop in on our clubhouse rooms and join our stimulating discussions about all things animal rights, effective advocacy, and more. If you like what we do at the Animal Liberation Hour and at Animal Activism Mentorship, You can support us through our Patreon at patreon.com/Animal Activism Mentorship. It helps keep us going and amplifying the voices of our community members. One more reminder that you can sign up for a free mentor to help you with your activism at animalactivismmentorship.com. We hope you will join our positive community of creative, inspiring, and dedicated activists in our move for animal liberation. We will catch you on our next episode. Until next time.